let's start this. Let's start this meeting. I want to thank you all for being here. My name is Warren Simons. I'm a board member of the Montgomery Art Guild here in Montgomery. We have a regular Art Talk series that features all sorts of interesting topics. In the past, we've done art talks on how to evaluate your artwork using the elements and principles of design. We've talked about entering art exhibits. For both the museum show and the Regents Bank show, we featured some award-winning artists from those shows who got a chance to talk about their work, who they are, how they do things. All of it is very informative for us. And tonight, we want to talk about copyright infringement, plagiarism, and how to protect your artwork. And we have three people with us tonight to have that discussion. The first is Leanna Lighthouser Lesley, who is a textile artist who lives in the Birmingham area and who is also a member of the Montgomery Art Guild, participates in our activities. The second person is Julie Grahame, who is the editor and the publisher of A Curator, which is a online magazine and blog that comes out of New York City featuring new and interesting photography. She's also the senior representative for the Yusef Karsh estate. Yusef Karsh was a wonderful 20th century photographer who specialized in portraiture, but she also represents others. And the final person who will be speaking with us tonight is Mark Harris, who is the director of the Dixie Art Colony Foundation, which is dedicated to gathering and promoting and the artwork and the legacy of the Dixie Art Colony, which was a mid-20th century artist colony here in central Alabama. So we're going to go ahead and get started. But before I start in with Leanna, I just want to talk a little bit briefly about copyright infringement, plagiarism, because I don't think we think about this a lot as artists. So copyright is your legal protection that anything that you make or produce, whether it's a painting, a photograph, sculpture, ceramics, textile art, music, writing, you're the legal owner of that, and nobody can use that that information or that work without your permission. Interestingly, as I dug around a little bit, I discovered that the first copyright laws were instituted in 1790 with the initiation of the U.S. Constitution. It is Article 8. Now I forget, but it was part of the original Constitution and has been many times amended since then. And those rights allow you to control everything that has to do with your piece of artwork, and nobody else can do anything with it. And if they do, they're in violation, and you can take them to court if you have the time and money and inclination to chase that down. Plagiarism and copyright infringement is when you use somebody else's work without their permission. If I grab a photo off of the internet and I put it into a flyer for a leaflet that we're going to promote an event, I have to have permission, or I have to buy it like we did for this one. That image that was on the flyer, we purchased on a stock company site. Plagiarism is a slightly different thing. Plagiarism is where you use somebody else's work in a way such as tracing it or copying it. You're not actually taking their work, but you're using it in some way to create something of yours and claiming that it's yours without giving credit to those artists. Now, we'll get into this. It's a very interesting question. There's a lot of complexity and ways that we can do things and not run afoul of plagiarism or copyright. Plagiarism is not illegal, but many people consider it immoral. And if you're in an institution of higher learning or you're in a business like a newspaper, you can get in a lot of trouble with it. And then the aspect of how we can protect our artwork when we post it to the internet and social media. We'll get into that too. So I just wanted to touch a little bit about that. First speaker is going to be Leanna Lighthouser Lesley, who is a textile artist. She does really fabulous work. She's, well, actually, Leanna, I'm going to let you talk just a little bit about what you do and how you deal with this question of copyright, how it comes up in your work.
Okay. So I have an example of my work. This is an image of Neil Young that is, can y'all see that?
Yep.
Okay. Which I made into a purse, one of the oldest pieces I've done. I've never sold it. It's just my personal purse. But just so you kind of get an idea of what I'm doing. I sort of stumbled across, I've needle pointed my whole life, and I sort of stumbled across the idea of needle pointing a portrait about 20 years ago. I really was needle pointing my own 3 daughters. And in the process of needle pointing them, it occurred to me that this was an interesting art form that doesn't get the attention that it deserves, because needlepoint has always been thought of as a craft. And so I started trying to think of how I could get my work out there as an art form, and also in portraiture. And so I started needle pointing high profile individuals, mostly musicians. And I was very nervous about what I was doing. I was in the process of creating art and also speaking with a number of different attorneys, one of which is Hugh, what's his last name? I don't know if you guys are familiar with Birmingham, but there's a place here called Workplay, and he's a photographer and an attorney, and I can't think of his last name right now, but I went to see him because I felt like if anyone could have me, I'm specifically needle pointing photographs, and I felt like he could really help me with this. And every cocktail party I went to, everywhere I went, I was seeking out information about copyright law, doing a lot of research on it. And I got an opportunity from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute to do a 20-piece jazz portrait exhibition. And then I really kicked my research into high gear because, it made me nervous because the pieces were going to be for sale and I didn't want to get into trouble. And I have found out a lot over the years about things like the intention behind what I'm doing. And I mean, I'm not just taking an image and making it the exact replica of that image. For example, taking a photograph and then painting it to the detail. Actually, the nature of needlepoint, all the stitches go to the right. And so people think that my needle points are exactly like the originals, but if you put the original up next to the needlepoint, you'll see that it's not exactly like it at all. And so, also, I work on changing up the backgrounds a lot of times and adding borders to my pieces, which
So Leanna, the things that you're describing, these are the things that an artist can do if they're using something as a reference.
Right.
Recompile and transform so that it's not an exact replica. So that's a conscious decision on your part to try and avoid just straight up copying other people's work.
Right, exactly. Also, there's over the years, I have become friends with a number of photographers in the state of Alabama that photograph musicians, and they have allowed me to use their photographs. And through my research over the years, there's a number of old school jazz photographers, like William Gottlieb is one of them. He photographed all of them. And his work is public domain. He's given over his photographs for they're copyright free. And so I try to use his images. If I find an image that I really, really love and I want to needlepoint, or I've been commissioned to needlepoint a particular musician and I can't find a William Gottlieb or whatever, I will search for the photographer and at the very least to give that photographer credit on the tag that's next to the piece of art in the exhibit, so that it'll say my name, the title of the art, and the photographer's name, which I think is the right thing to do in that instance.
One of the things that I found when I was researching this was that it's not just always straightforward. This is copyright and this is copyright infringement. There's something that is called fair use. And I know you and I talked about this a little bit earlier in the week. Maybe you could just talk a little bit about what that is and how that comes to play in artists who are using other work as references or guides in what they're doing.
Right. Well, the original exhibition that I was asked to do at the Civil Rights Institute 20 years ago was through the director of education. And so I started really looking into how does copyright apply when you're using the image for the purposes of educating, and found the fair use clause, which I'll read a little bit of it. The fair use is a legal doctrine that promotes freedom of expression by permitting the unlicensed use of copyright protected works in certain circumstances, such as criticism, comment, news reporting, teaching, scholarship, and research. And so when I approach museums and cultural arts centers to try to get exhibition space, I bill in my email, I promote my show as educational. And I use biographies about the musicians with the photographer's name at the bottom of the biography, so that when people go through and they look at each piece, not only are they seeing needlepoint in a way that they've never seen it before, they're seeing jazz musicians, some of these jazz musicians in a needlepointed form like they've never seen them before. And then there's a bio next to it that teaches the viewer who this musician was and who they studied under and who they influenced. And all of that raises and elevates jazz music. So if I were to have to go to court to defend myself, I would be able to say that everything that I'm doing is elevating the public perception of jazz music, which I would hope would keep me out of trouble.
Right. So
Yeah.
if you had to come up with a description for what would be copyright infringement, how would you word that? How would you describe it? What would you say to other artists who might be thinking about these questions? What it is as part of all of our thinking about how to avoid it.
Well, I think that there is, I think the first word that comes to my mind is intention. What is the intention behind what it is that you're doing? In other words, if you have a famous photograph and you want to draw or paint that photograph to the detail, is your intention to show that you are skilled at replicating a photograph down to the detail? Or is your intention to take this photograph, be inspired by it, and transform it into a work of art that takes it to the next level? I mean, I think that there's a big difference between trying to exactly replicate something to show skill, and actually taking a photograph and conceptualizing it and intentionally transforming it into something that tells a bigger story than just the fact that this is a photograph and it was copied. For me, this is a jazz musician. I needle pointed it, and my intention is to teach you about this musician and the art of needlepoint.
Thank you. This spring, as part of the Montgomery Museum, the Montgomery Art Guild Museum exhibit, an artist submitted 2 pieces, one of which I immediately recognized as a reference to a very famous Gordon Parks image. And it was a beautiful painting, and it was exactly to the last little speculated light bouncing on the car that was driving by the two people standing in the image. And there was a second one, and I assumed that, well, I didn't assume, but I decided to go looking, and that piece turned out to be an exact replica of a album cover. So
Mhm.
I had a conversation. I called them up. First of all, we discussed it, and then we discussed it with the museum, and then I called them up, and we had a good. Actually, I talked to you, Leanna, because I knew you were dealing with this question. Had a very good conversation with him about how we thought this might be copyright infringement, and that he'd replicated it exactly. And it really was a wonderful conversation, because he actually did it because he'd painted it because it was such a moving image, and he said he'd been haunted by it for years and decided he was
Mhm.
going to try and paint it. And I sympathized with him completely, because it really is a haunting image. But he ultimately, voluntarily agreed that he would submit some other work. So it's
Mhm.
something that we, as painters, we're always dealing with, looking at things and finding things on the internet, really liking them, downloading them, painting them. And the degree, the question of, as you said, the intention, the degree that we transform the work or recompose it or recompile it in a way that it becomes ours. We've
Mhm.
transformed it into something else. It can be a little bit of a gray area that you have to sort of work through. I really love the way that you have reached out to the photographers and asked them for permission, or found individuals who have given up their copyright. Just so everybody knows, the copyright laws mean that you own your work until you die, and then in general for another 75 years before it becomes available in the public domain. That's not true for everything. Julie Grahame sent me this wonderful PDF today, and it's like 5 or 8 pages long, and it shows you all the little nuances of when that isn't exactly true. Sometimes if it predates 1975, there are other slightly different laws that apply. But I raise this just so that we all know that it isn't just copyright while the artist is alive. Sometimes the artist transfers the copyright to other individuals, or remains in the estate for until 75 years is up, or it goes on to a foundation and becomes their copyright. So there's lots of parts to that.
Well, and
So
the Van Gogh exhibit that's traveling all over the country right now is a perfect example of that. I mean, he's been dead so long that his images are public domain. And so that, they can show them in the way that they want to show them without getting into any trouble. I remember when Beatrix Potter, when her death hit the 100-year mark, and all of her images became public domain. And I remember it was a big deal, because who doesn't love Beatrix Potter? And now all of a sudden these images are public domain. So, but you're right, sometimes they're not. And
right,
in my case, people always ask me, oh, well, did Wynton Marsalis give you permission to needlepoint him? And I'm like, it's not Wynton Marsalis, it's the photographer that took Wynton Marsalis's picture. I mean, technically, Wynton Marsalis's estate can't come after me. The photographer would have to come after me.
right.
Yeah.
There was something else I wanted to ask. Well, so anything else that you'd like to um,
Well, I do
talk
know
about?
this, and this is something that I try to remember and think I've thought about a lot over the years, is that if you take an image and you change it by 30%, then you are out of trouble with copyright. And so, it I mean, it doesn't take a lot to change an image by 30%. And in that 30%, you can put your stamp on it and you can make it what you want it to be, which is inspired by the original image. So I think about that a lot when I do what I'm doing too. So I just want to make sure that I think about all these things while I'm working.
Yeah, there's an incredible amount of information on the internet when I started digging and just trying to find my way to be able to even talk with this much knowledge on the subject.
Right.
There is a ton out there. So everybody who is interested in finding out more about this, just turn on your computer or your iPad and Google copyright infringement, plagiarism, and you will see tons and tons of stuff. And copyright is controlled by the Copyright Office in the US government. And you can go to their website and they have a lot of really good information about what it is, how you infringe on it, what you can do to avoid it. A number of people suggested that in addition to what Leanna just said about 30% of change, they talked about trying to gather up several different inspirational sources and combining things. And maybe painting with a certain style or a technique without actually copying an image. There are ways that you can find to be, you get inspired by somebody and by something. Of course, if you want to paint something as a training tool, then I think that's fine. But it's when you do something and then you display it publicly and claim that it's yours that you start running against that. Because all the great artists and all of us do a lot of copying of the master's work because that's how you learn how they did it. And it influences and helps you create your own style. But you can't paint a Monet and then submit it to the Montgomery Art Guild Regents Bank show and say it's your own.
Well, right, and and we're taught that in art school. I mean, we're literally graded on how well we we drew or painted the still life that was in front of us, and I mean, you're taught to draw what you see, paint what you see. You're also taught a lot of other things, but it's hard to break yourself of that, that's what a good artist is someone who can draw what they see. And, it is a skill, but it's also a copyright infringement. And I remember the photographer's name, and I want to give him credit. His name is Hugh Hunter. His brother is Alan Hunter. He was one of the original VJs on MTV, and he and his brother opened an office space in Birmingham called Workplay. And he's the attorney. It's a creative space, music mostly, and he's the attorney that runs Workplay. And so he was a good resource for me because he deals with creatives all the time. Plus, he's a photographer himself. Yeah.
Wonderful. Leanna, this has been really great. I'm so glad you agreed to participate in this. What we're going to do is take the next two speakers and then we'll open up the floor for discussion. And we'll ask, when we get to that point, we'll ask everybody to turn on their video feeds and their microphones so we can hear what everybody wants to say. And the three speakers will stay with us and answer your questions and participate. So Leanna, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you.
All right. And Julie, you can pop in and join us. There she is.
Hello.
And everybody, just before we go any further, there is a chat window and some people are typing in some constructive comments on the things that we've discussed so far. Sarah Graves, who works at the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts, added a couple of things that you might want to take a look at related to these questions. And if anybody has things that they want to post along the way, you can put them in there and we can come back to them in the discussion. Or as participants, you can take a look at them and see what's being said. So as I said, Julie is she edits and produces A Curator, the online blog and magazine, and has done a lot of work with different artists and estates dealing with the questions of licensing and copyright. So maybe you want to start, Julie, with just explaining a little bit about that and the things that have come up that might be related to what we're discussing here tonight.
Definitely. I mean, it's funny, just as you were speaking, it just popped into my head. I've been in the photography business for 30 years, and I started in an analog photo stock agency. It was actually music and celebrities and news. And you would never have sent an image out to a client that wasn't in amount with your copyright and the name of the band and the year and so on. And yet you wouldn't believe how few photographers take the time to mark their JPEGs, put their caption information in their files before even they send it to somebody like me to produce in my magazine. I always take the extra step to try and add copyright to the metadata before I publish everything in a curator, because I feel like that's the least that I can do. But on the whole, photographers are not necessarily that good at protecting their images, and then people go ahead and use them without knowing who they are, and then they become orphan works, and it's kind of a self-perpetuating thing.
Julie, can I stop you for a second? So I took a workshop that you gave a couple of years ago, and you mentioned this very thing, and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. And I have been really disciplined ever since then by making sure that before I post anything publicly, I open the file in Photoshop and I go to the menu bar item file and I scroll down the file information, and a box opens, and in there's an option to say this is copyright. And then I can leave a little note saying, this is copyright by me, 2021, no use without my permission. And here's how you can contact me. And I leave my email address so that at least I have some sort of legal right. This applies to anybody taking a picture of any kind of artwork, painting, sculpture, you're submitting it, you're floating it on Instagram. You can put that in any file that you've created. And it was a really valuable little piece of wisdom that I think is useful. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I mean, it's an issue with things like Instagram and Facebook. Anytime you're going to upload your images to platforms like that, they're probably going to strip that metadata. But if you're putting it on your own website and somebody takes the image and uses it, and you can prove either because the file info is there. I mean, there's an additional layer to copyright where it's willful. So if somebody's actively removed the metadata, I mean, I'm sorry, I don't know what anybody's experience level is here, and I appreciate we have different artists, so I don't want to get too into that. But from my side of trying to protect copyright from people like Leanna, it is a question of just trying to keep your boxes checked. Do have a best practice, which is I think what you're saying, Warren. A couple points that came up based on what you guys were just discussing. There are some issues depending on what you're doing with the personality. So it's not necessarily the case that you would only need the photographer's permission. Depending on, if you're making one artwork, but if you were making copies and you were selling them, then you would potentially run into issues with certainly some living personalities, depending on what state they're in, and definitely some deceased personalities as well. So I wouldn't necessarily say that it's read that you won't have to pay attention to who the image is of. I work with.
How does that come to play? I mean, how would you figure that out as an artist?
You have to consider whether what you're doing is commercial or fine art, because we're all here because we have the fine art exception in the copyright law, that we have certain rights to do certain things with our art, but people, certain estates like Muhammad Ali, for example, they're very proactive in trying to retain the personality rights in these deceased figures. So even a museum that was going to make a poster advertising a show would potentially have to clear the rights with the personality who's in the image that they're going to use. It's a whole other question, really. But I'm just saying, don't disregard the fact that you are using the face of a famous person. You certainly couldn't use that to advertise a product. Those things are very straightforward commercial uses. And then there's, you said gray areas, so many gray areas. The last thing that any of this is straightforward. And actually, no, that's the penultimate thing. The last thing is that you want to be arguing this in a court of law. There are a couple of big examples of cases recently. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the case between the Andy Warhol Foundation and Lynn Goldsmith around a photograph of hers of Prince. Leanna mentioned the 30% rule. Again, you don't really want to be arguing this in front of a court, but essentially, Lynn Goldsmith took a picture of Prince in the late 70s for Interview magazine. Fast forward all of these years, and I think that she caught wind that the Andy Warhol Foundation was using her image in Warhol style, that he'd done a Warhol kind of version of the Prince photograph. They decided to preemptively try and assert their right in their derivative work of her copyrighted photograph. So it turns into a lawsuit. She was raising, hundreds of thousands of dollars to try and defend herself. The initial court result, I think the initial ruling was against the photographer. But my point is, you should see, if anyone's interested, look it up, because when you look at the paperwork, they are literally drilling down into whether Warhol moved Prince's eyebrow over a little bit and whether there's a bit more eyeliner here or there. We do not want to be having to argue these things. So, Leanna is doing as much due diligence as she can. I'm not sure that just crediting the photographer is necessarily going to, get you off the hook if somebody decided to take issue. That being said, I worked with a photographer who had a portrait of a musician appropriated by an artist on the West Coast. He essentially took the head off of the portrait and took a bunch of other people's photographs of heads of famous people and just stuck them on, and was selling enormous prints for 15 grand a pop. And the photographer is now, her image is registered with the Copyright Office, but she's really in a position where she's an artist. And does she really want to be suing another artist? No, what she would have liked would have been to collaborate, to have had a nice artist conversation with him, just, like Leanna would potentially do, if it's accessible, and maybe pay a license fee, maybe not, maybe do stuff together. But in the end, it came down to whether she really wanted to pursue him, whether she wanted to take it all the way to court, or whether she just wanted to try and settle and make him stop. And I think that's what she decided to do in the end. So you can have good practice, you can register your work with the Copyright Office, you can do all of these wonderful things. Someone like Richard Prince, which is a whole other nightmare, he's literally recently taken an image off a young woman's Instagram and added a stupid comment, and he settles out of court. Nobody knows how much for. It's a problem for the creators. So those are some of the things I wrote down while Leanna was speaking.
Yeah.
Question.
So what has been some of your experiences when you're working with these artists and taking steps to try and defend the copyright and the licensing that's behind that?
Yeah, well, it's definitely a question of picking your battles, because nobody has the energy. Anyone that's made any images is going to find other people using them. So Kosh, as an example, of course, our images are absolutely everywhere. This is even, our Einstein that was made by an artist that just happened to work in an office down the street from me. And I was joking that I was going to sue him for copyright infringement. But just on a side note, I do feel that one artwork of a photograph, like if you took the Albert Schweitzer and you made one painting that was the same or very similar, my understanding is that that's permitted, but you couldn't publish it anywhere, and you couldn't make copies of it, and you couldn't sell it commercially, and so on. So again, it's a minefield, and everyone should just educate themselves as much as possible. But with Kosh, because his images go back to the 1930s, because he was based in Canada so much, it's so complicated that very rarely would I really threaten to go, actually go after somebody. And I've been working with the material for about 20 years, and really there's only been one occasion where I have actually threatened, to hire a lawyer. And that was a commercial usage by a company that should have known better. And in the end, we didn't go anywhere near a lawyer. I just threw my weight around and threatened to shame them on social media and stuff like that. And then, choose a number in dollars that I thought wasn't going to be too complicated for them to just pay it to make me shut up and go away. Kosh is definitely very, very complicated. But because of who he was, and because most of the images are quite well known, on the whole, people do come to me. We do have a robust licensing business. We have robust relationships with the collections that own his prints and so on. And we are dedicated to keeping the images alive and out there. However, I work with a young man named Eric Pickersgill, and he had a project called Removed, which some of you might be familiar with. I'll pop it in the chat when I'm finished. But It was published in Business Insider, I think it was 2015 or 14, 2015. An article about the work. It was a series of large format black and white photographs of people looking like they should have been talking to their friends, but they were actually staring into their hand where their phone would have been. He removed the phones from the scene, created this fascinating body of work that just hit the internet at an opportune moment. And essentially, it went viral. You know, my actual only experience of something really going viral, to the extent that a website, I think it was Board Panda or one of those kind of sites, took all the images from the original website that had published it with permission. And once they'd used them, it was all over the place. So he was waking up to 500 images, 500 emails, day one, day two, panicking, you know, makes some phone calls, manages to find me. And we started working together. Now, fast forward, there are a bazillion websites all over the world that have used his images. So he registered with the Copyright Office after he started working with me. So after they'd kind of gone viral, but still in a reasonable period of time. And we now work with an online system called Pixie. So it's like a reverse image search, which everybody has access to with Google. There's a system called TinEye, and you can upload an image and it will crawl the internet and it can show you all the bazillions of places.
Can you put that in the chat room too?
Yeah, absolutely. It's also useful for, you know, someone like Leanna who maybe has an image and doesn't know whose it is, so you can upload it and it will show you. So with Eric, because we have the benefit of this finite body of work, so Karsh, thousands of images, Eric, 50 images in a tangible series, published in this location for the first time, because that's a whole other thing when you register your images with the Copyright Office. Have they been published or not? What does that even mean? Have they been published? They're on your website. Have they been published? Not really. So over the years, we've done tons of licensing. Over the years, exponentially more people than have come to us and asked permission have gone ahead and used images without permission. Pixie does the hard work for us, but then because we have done so many licenses and given so much permission, we now have to make absolutely certain that we didn't give the rights to somebody. I guess what I'm driving at is it's just hard work. It's complicated. You can do your due diligence. But when it comes down to it, unfortunately, the burden is kind of on us as the rights holders to prove whether someone had infringed, whether you've given them permission or not, how bad is it? So for, I think, the 3 or 4 years that we've been working with Pixie, we've made quite a bit of money just settling. Most of that's been outside of the US because the laws in Europe are a bit more straightforward at points. You know, I think in Belgium, if someone's used 6 images, they have to pay X. But we took it so far as to get quite in deep. We have papers in court with a particular infringer who we tried to settle with and just decided that they were going to throw around things like fair use. And they decided that they would dig around and see if they could somehow prove that Eric hadn't registered the images in time. And then they decided that the statute of limitations had expired because he didn't see the infringement quickly enough. It's a nightmare. Wow. And the last thing you want to do is now be going to court and having some aggressive, you know, defendant.
In the workshop that I was attended when you presented your talk, one of the things that it's kind of related to that point, I went away from the workshop with a sense, and I think it's correct, that with the internet, the invention of the internet and all the work that gets posted there, it's the Wild West. And you're trying to, you know, you're the kid trying to put his finger in the dike. And so we talked about some other options that artists might do, like putting, what do they call that, a water stamp on their image, or put their name with a copyright symbol. And I think at the time you said you weren't a big fan of that because you thought it disrupted the viewing of the image, which is my opinion, and it was before you ever said that, if I remember that correctly. And you also just said that, you know, this is where we are. This is the modern day, and that's part of what happens when we are posting artwork like we do to the internet.
I mean, it's sad. You know, I made my living from licensing images, and the licensing business is not over by any means. But I do find that some people are just too concerned. I really think that, you know, without the internet, without the Karsh website, without our Instagram, people would be forgetting who he is. But because we have access to those things, we're able to find new eyeballs, find new audiences, find younger people who become inspired. It's a little different than with Eric Pickersgill, because he's a young artist and he needs to put food on his family, to quote George Bush. You know, and to be asked to use images for free in return for exposure by big websites or TV shows, you'd be amazed at the people that come along and try and beg free images off you. Rather than put a watermark on your image and put it to Instagram and then write, you know, I do not give Mark Zuckerberg the rights to my images, you're giving them regardless of what you say. And I would encourage everybody to just read the terms on Instagram and Facebook when they are uploading their artwork, and just understand what it is that you're actually doing if you can. People think that Mark Zuckerberg could then, you know, license your images on to another company and so on. It's not really the case. I'd rather you took the time to register your work with the Copyright Office than take the time to put a flowery watermark on your image, depending on who you are. If you're trying to get work, if you're trying to appeal to somebody like me, you know, photography curators and professionals, we just don't expect to see it. It's hard enough to see an image on Instagram anyway, never mind with. So, you know, I had a situation with an enormous company that wanted to use an image. They didn't pay very much money and they refused to credit me. And there were all sorts of reasons why I said yes. And I decided to put it upon myself to go on social media and just make sure that I told everybody that it was a Karsh picture. So, you know, I mean, I hate this. It shouldn't be our responsibility, but unfortunately at this point, you know, it is.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. Is there anything else you'd like to add before we move on? And
I'm just looking at my notes. You know, something that Leanna said that made me happy, because it's something that people send me all kinds of pictures. You should see them, like a number of oil paintings that people have done of Winston Churchill in Larry colors, and, you know, never mind all the colorization of his images that are done digitally. It is our feeling that, you know, be inspired by wonderful photographers like Karsh and Bill Gottlieb. I mean, the world is lucky that Bill Gottlieb decided to give his images to the Library of Congress. And I think that that's also really good advice. There is some fantastic images. They have superb high-res files. If you're not sure, don't do it. Because that, you know, Andy Warhol or Lynn Goldsmith might decide to come and sue you. The people that we're suing for Eric Pickersgill, we tried to settle for, you know, a few tens of thousands of dollars. And at this point, it's probably going to end up costing them more than that. So that was the one battle that we did decide to pick.
by the way, the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts has a copy of the Karsh portrait of Churchill, which is fabulous. And I really love the story behind how he took that image, which was, it's like in the middle of the war and Churchill's busy and he gruffly comes into the room and Karsh says, "You got to take that cigar out of your mouth." And he goes, "I'm not taking it out." And Karsh goes over and snatches it out and goes back and really quickly takes the image. And you get that wonderful scowl. And then a whole bunch of images after that, he's smiling and sweet. But that was the image where he really nailed it, like, you know, a wonderful, wonderful piece of work.
There's a very adorable recreation of that with Morley Safer and Karsh on 60 Minutes, which is on our website. So I'm going to put that link in the chat as well. Wonderful. And if anyone has any questions, I'll put my email address here too.
Okay. Julie, thank you so much. So we'll take Mark as the last speaker. And Mark, you can turn your video on and your, there he is. As I said earlier, Mark is the director of the Dixie Art Colony Foundation. And Mark, maybe you want to talk just briefly about the foundation and also the challenges that you have with these questions of protecting copyright and licensing issues and whatnot.
Sure. Yes, the Dixie Art Colony Foundation was founded in an effort to preserve the history left behind by the artists that participated. We've documented 142 artists that participated. Of course, they're all deceased. The family members or the children of a lot of the artists are also deceased. And consequently, we have approximately 800 works that are related to the artist. And all of those particular pieces of art, you know, they range from lithographs, etchings, as well as watercolor, oil paintings, etc., drawings, and so forth. And we have photographed, we're in the process of cataloging all of these pieces and photographing them and archiving them on our website, which is dixieartcolony.org. We have had some issues where we had some photographs of, some of our photographs of a particular painting, 2 paintings by one of the artists, that was used to promote an event where artists were selling artwork. And I still am confused about why this particular organization chose to do that. But because they really weren't relevant to anything specific. But as a result of that, you know, it was concerning because we do professionally photograph all of our work and we have expense involved in doing that. So that's one of the issues that we've had. And we do, when artwork is donated to us by one of the family members, we do have a contract with them and we do request that they sign over the copyrights to that particular piece of artwork that they have donated. In some cases, we also have other donors that donate artwork, say by that same artist. And in that case, if we have connections with the family of that artist, what we do is we approach the artist family and we again try to get them to agree to sign over the copyrights to that particular piece of artwork. So I would say at least probably about 95% of our collection, we do actually have the copyrights to. We go to great lengths to actually research and try to find the family members of these artists. And we use Ancestry.com, newspapers.com. And one of the things is finding obituaries where they passed away, where we could find names of their descendants or their children. That a lot of times is a starting point for us. I think we have, of the 142 artists that participated, I think we've made contact with about 42 of the families. I believe that's correct. We've also have a large archive. We've added actually just this year close to 500 photographs, vintage photographs, of which we digitize and scan and create high resolution copies of those. And we also, restore those in such a way to try to preserve them for the future and catalog those and make those available, a lot of those on our website as well. We have had issues with those being taken and used for different things. And actually, although those particular images are, we don't know, and who actually took the photographs. In a lot of cases, it was family members of the artist. But what we've done is we've spent a lot of time and actually spent resources in terms of manpower as well as actual dollars to have these photographs restored or to restore them. And in essence, what we're doing is claiming copyright on those. A lot of them, according to my information and my understanding, the copyrights would have expired by this time anyway on some of the photographs. And this would be for those that are known and unknown, and most of them we don't know who actually the photographer was. But based on my research, it's my opinion that the restored versions of these, which some require hours worth of work, are actually, we would hold the copyrights for those particular images at this point. We also have a program called Dixie Art Colony, a New Generation, where we have artists, local artists, that will go out to different areas where the colonists painted and did plein air painting. And we had an issue recently where someone, a particular painting that was done for us by one of the artists of one of our vintage photographs was actually copied onto a piece of furniture by a local organization and was posted on Facebook. And I was sort of in disbelief when I saw that, because they actually had a printed out photograph printed out from our website with our logo on it at that particular painting that an artist was actually reproducing on a piece of furniture, which was kind of interesting. Actually, you know, that has been removed, I'm pleased to say, and is no longer an issue. But, you know, a lot of it is because people just don't know any better, I think. And that was one of the things that I was excited about this particular talk, was that, you know, hopefully this will help educate people regarding some of those things. I think education is one of the keys here.
Mark, I know that, at least I think I know, you're in the process of trying to find a space for a museum for this work, or is that, where is that?
Correct. We have a small space in downtown Wetumpka currently at 219 Hill Street. We're open by appointment and with limited hours, which you can visit our website for more information about that. But yes, we are in the process of planning actually what we're calling the Elmore County Cultural Arts Center, which will be a sizable facility that will also, according to our preliminary plans, will include a home for the Dixie Art Colony Foundation, but also for the Elmore County Art Guild.
Oh, great.
And also other art organizations within the area as well. And
Wonderful.
we're hoping it'll be utilized by the Elmore County school system.
That's great.
So,
well, would you like to say something more? Or should we open the floor and see what people have?
well,
questions?
one of the things I'd like to say, yes, is that, you know, a lot of times people want to know, do I need to register my work? Or a photograph or a piece of artwork, a painting, a drawing, etc. And my understanding is that, you know, when a work is created and it's published in some fashion, that there is an automatic copyright. You can also register that, and that does increase your standing if it is registered, and especially after the automatic copyright has expired, then in some cases you can re-register it. Also, it is interesting to think about the fact that, excuse me, I've lost my train of thought here. In terms of prints, that's one of the things I want to say. We are in certain cases doing prints when we have permission to do prints to raise money for the foundation. But this is done, you know, not as a commercial enterprise, but actually for fundraising purposes. I think that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover.
Okay. So everybody should know that there is a ton of information out there, and the three speakers that we've had tonight have touched on different aspects of it in the course of the work that they do, either as artists or photographers or directors of foundations. But there's a lot more out there. And if you're interested in this, all you got to do is start searching and digging. I would say make sure to stop at the U.S. Copyright website. Okay, so anybody who would like to participate and ask some questions or throw in some comments, turn on your video feed and turn on your microphone. And wave your hand and I'll call on you so that we don't get, you know, stepping on each other. Lisa?
Hi. So I'm also a photographer, and I am somewhat curious about not just other photographers, but everything. You know, everything was that isn't nature, and even nature to in some ways, was created by somebody. So any still life that anybody's ever made through history the bottles, the, whatever is in the still life, somebody designed it, somebody made it, somebody fabricated it. I work with fabrics and I work with glass. Somebody along the line, I don't know who, designed these pieces. And so it's like always kind of in the background, swirling around in my head, is this appropriate for me? And going back to that 30% rule, I'm, putting multiple different things together and creating new compositions and changing colors. And, I'm not creating a replica of an object, but I'm making different objects interact with each other to create abstracts. But, throughout, I know the case that you're talking about with Warhol, with the flower. But, Warhol, Jasper Johns, Duchamp, what's her name? Cindy Sherman. There's so many different people that appropriated. Louise Nevelson, just gathered objects and then reorganized these objects into walls. And so my question is, where's the boundary? Where's the boundary between what's appropriate to utilize and when are you being inappropriate in your behavior in working with other things that other people created?
Well, I think you're talking about medium, right? Versus using other people's art.
Well, I'm working with, I have a lot of pieces of glass that was created to be often functional, but or decorative, and I'm using that in my compositions because I like the reflective quality of it. So, is there really a difference between, what's his name? Jansen, was it Jansen who wrote The History of Art? W.H. Jansen, maybe, talked about the decorative arts as being lesser arts or not really valued as art, but really, they should be. The creative arts, the craft arts. And, I use scarves, I use fabrics.
Does anybody have some thoughts on that?
I do just want to clarify, I was talking specifically about a photograph of the musician Prince when I was talking about the Andy Warhol.
You weren't talking about the flower, because the flower also got taken to court.
I don't know that one. I mean, obviously, appropriation is a huge part of art, and it's almost insulting in a way, the sense that, it was almost as if the court was saying, well, it's Andy Warhol, so you should be honored that he's taken your picture of Prince and he's Andy Warholified it, which is pretty insulting to the photographer. But I think you're talking about elements, and I think back to Leanna's point is that you're using multiple elements and you're creating what sounds like a unique piece of art that no individual aspect of it would, potentially be a problem. I talked to someone recently who had made a project where she had used news images, actual news images, recent news images, but she'd made a fine art project with them. She'd printed them on material, she'd shredded them, she'd hung them and so on. And I really didn't think that she should have been concerned because she'd created a new, completely fresh. And I do think, you want to look at what you've made and say, if Mr. Karsh was standing here, would he say, well, clearly that's my picture of Churchill? Because at the end of the day, you might just be doing that in front of a judge. But you're asking all the right questions. But I think for you, when it sounds like there's quite so many different elements going on, that it sounds like you perhaps have a little bit less to be concerned about. But I'm not a lawyer.
Okay, more discussion.
Warren.
Mark?
I would like to just mention one other thing, and that is, I think, a lot of people, just in general terms, think that if they purchase a piece of art, that perhaps, they can reproduce it or they own the copyrights, and, they don't really understand that all they have, is that particular artwork, and that it really is still, the copyright is still the owned by the artist or the family of the artist or their heirs. Um, and I think there is a lot of misconception just among lay people as far as that's concerned.
And there is like a weird, you were talking about protecting your images of your artworks.
Right.
So, when we were talking about Van Gogh earlier, I did write some clearances for a documentary film about some photographers, and they had some kid pull art, and like I had to try and go and clear the rights. And I'm looking at pictures of, Rubens paintings and so on, and I could find like a high-res file at 5 or 6 different photo agencies who had each somehow made their own photograph of the artwork, and even though the artwork might be out of copyright, suddenly the photography of the artwork is in copyright. I mean, it's pretty wild.
Yeah, one thing that's been frustrating for us is that we're happy for people to use our images. We love for people to use our images. We want people to use our images. And that's actually why we're uploading them online, is so that people do have access to them. But we want people to source them and to let us know exactly how they're using them and that they're using them in the proper context. And that's really all we want.
Okay, more discussion? Anybody thinking of asking a question or joining the conversation?
Well, I'd like to say something. I'd like to thank Julie for being here tonight and talking to us about all of this, because this has been the struggle of my career. This has been, just I never go a day without thinking about all of this. And it's so gray. It's just so gray. And social media has made it even grayer. And you think that you're doing it the right way. You've got as much information as you can possibly have, but I think to some degree, it's like you said, Warren, it is the wild, wild west, and you have to make that decision about whether you're going to get on that horse or not. And there are days where I put a lot of thought into it. One of the things that I do too is I do it's a one-off. It's that there is no mass production going on. There is just the one piece of art. I have drafting those drawers, the little thin drawers, and the top of my that piece of furniture is images that I have not needle pointed, and the bottom drawers are full of images that I have, and they're in those drawers and they're done. And so I don't ever make the mistake of going back and doing them again. But
I think you have an advantage if that's your practice, is that you just
right. Yeah, and I just am trying to tell an important story about American history and music history, and I stay in my lane. I rarely get out of that lane, and but I do worry about it. I'd be a fool not to.
Yeah, but there's also, again, you don't want to be arguing this in front of a jury or a judge, but one of the questions might be, are you taking away business? And there was a really interesting scenario. So Albert Einstein's likeness rights were protected for many, many years post his death by the Hebrew University. And I believe that basically General Motors used sort of a drawing of Einstein, and this is a commercial use, and you can't use Einstein to sell a car. And it did go to court, and if I remember correctly, they lost the rights to protect Einstein. And the sorts of things that had came up was Einstein never did anything commercial, so it doesn't really affect what the
Right.
Hebrew University are trying to do. I mean, it may sound, unpalatable to some of us, but it was a very interesting way of looking about, with my friend Jeanette, who's had her picture of this musician taken and this guy's just chopped the head off, it's tacky, it's insulting, it's causing confusion. I mean, I think that's another thing. To a layperson, would your needlepoint cause confusion compared to an original? So like, is someone going to have to choose between your rendering of Billie Holiday and Bill Gottlieb's fine art print? That's probably a no. But with Jeanette, it was a different story. And people are ringing her from art fairs going, I can see your picture. What's going on? This guy's put Obama's head on it. And, it was really a problem for her, and it was affecting her business and potentially her reputation and all the sorts of things that she's worked so hard to protect.
Yeah. It's
So-
scary.
So here's a simple question, or a simpler framework for looking at this question. So I'm a photographer, but I'm also trying to learn how to paint. And occasionally I'll see something that I really like on the internet that's not mine. And I'm inclined to want to download that image and paint it. And sometimes it looks pretty close to it. So that's not an issue, right? If I do that, as long as I'm not involved in displaying it for commercial purposes, or even considering entering it into an exhibit where I might win some award money, or even claiming it as my own, because I don't think I would ever do that. I would source what the painting was based on. But I think there are a number of people who don't face the same questions, or at least at the same level, as someone like Leanna, who's doing things, some really amazing things. So anyways, that's just kind of a more simplified question of inquiry based on what we've discussed here tonight. Where do the artists who are never going to become rich and famous at what they're doing, or even have an idea that they want to spend a lot of time trying to develop a business or commercial interest in the work they're creating, where do we fall in that spectrum?
Does that somewhat fall into the idea of fair use? Is there any correlation there? And I would like to ask Julie to talk a little bit more about the fair use.
I mean, fair use gets bandied around a lot, and it's not straightforward. I mean, it's another one of those things where you don't want to be arguing it, I think, in a court of law. Sarah's just put a link. I'm wondering if there's a short answer. Handy flowchart. That's great. Everyone should click on this. This looks really helpful. I mean, I've had things like, I remember when Jerry Garcia died, MTV News stole a picture from Baron Woolman and just ran it over and over on their news program. And when we had a problem with it, and claimed it was fair use because it was news and he died, and that was not true at all. And they had to pay a license fee. That wasn't, the news exception didn't count. They were able to call us and clear the rights to use the image. Fair use. I don't have a short answer for you, really.
Tell me a little bit more about the news angle.
Well, I don't know what would be permitted, because there's
Right.
so many things have gone on. Are you familiar with the Daniel Morel?
Yes.
The earthquake story? So that could have been the example of a newsworthy usage by a third party, but they lost, right? The AFP lost the case. It's another complicated case, but Haitian photographers on the ground during the earthquake put some images on Twitter. Someone else took those pictures and put them on his own Twitter, and then Agence France Presse contacted that person, and that person said they could use them. And then, it actually turned into a court hearing, which was crazy. That I think Daniel won, but the defense had millions of dollars to spend. So I'm not sure exactly when a picture would be so newsworthy that an organization didn't have to clear the rights for it, whether it would be that sort of Syrian boy on the beach from a couple of years ago, that kind of scenario. I'm not sure, but I still think most photographers are going to want to be asked permission. Fair use, I think there's educational probably comes under fair use. I'm not sure, Leanna, that educational would necessarily be a good argument for you, because to me, educational is, you know, it's in a classroom setting. It's an image is being critiqued. You can't just use a picture, say, of Albert Schweitzer and say, this is a nice picture of Albert Schweitzer. It would have to be, you know, how did the photographer do the lighting, and did he trim the moustache or the eyebrows? No, he didn't. But you know, that's more of the kind of fair use thing where you're using something for critique and you're in no way really reproducing it. You know, you're not infringing on that photographer's exclusive right to be the only one to make copies and show those copies.
Lisa?
Julie, I found the article that referenced the flowers. In 1964, the editor of Modern Magazine was a woman named Patricia Caulfield, Caulfield. And she had taken pictures of 7 hibiscus flowers that Warhol cropped and then colorized. And this unauthorized, now I'm going to read a little bit of it. His unauthorized use of another artist's photograph landed him in trouble when Caulfield brought suit in 1966. They settled out of court. From this time on, Warhol based his art on photographs that he took himself. So that was what I was referencing.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
More?
Warren, if I may,
Mhm.
I saw that Sarah posted earlier about Wikimedia and referencing that. I will say I use that resource all the time. But when I was compiling a collage of images to use to paint the Selma to Montgomery Anniversary March mural downtown in Montgomery, I took, excuse me, several of Matt Herron's photos into the collage, and I contacted him, the late great Matt Herron, civil rights photographer, amazing human being. But in my correspondence with him, he said, you actually have 3 of my photographs, one of which I'd gotten from Wikimedia. And I was like, this said, you know, the Abernathy family put it up as a family photo. And he said, no, actually, I took that. So I would not have known that it was Matthew Herron's copyrighted photo because the Abernathy family put it onto Wikimedia as their own. So I don't know how I would have known that. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there, that Wikimedia is not foolproof, just like anything else, right?
Yeah, and it's definitely can be a problem. But Wikimedia try super hard to make sure that images that are uploaded. I've written a few Wikipedia pages, and anytime I've tried to upload an image, I've needed an express permission from the photographer to send in to them. There are different sorts of rights that can be granted, so you do need to read the fine print a little bit as to which Creative Commons someone's given the image. But yeah, it's not guaranteed, but it is another good resource. But then they're very small images, so not necessarily that handy.
Sarah, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to piggyback. Hi, Julie. Actually, see your face. I work with Julie all the time at the museum.
So excited to see you.
With all the Karsh things, we only talk over email. We don't actually communicate, so this is fun. Yeah, I just want. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Mag people. Some of you know me. I work in the curatorial department doing rights and reproductions for the Montgomery Museum of Fine Arts. And I just want to piggyback on what Julie said with Wikimedia Commons, is that the nice thing about Wikimedia Commons and Flickr is they have extensive information about the copyright and how to attribute work. And some things you'll find, they'll say, especially like with many Karsh works, they'll say you need to contact, this is subject to copyright. Just because it's on here, we have it on here by fair use because of this and this and this and this and this. But it's a great starting point to look at what's available. I also recommend anything that was done as part of the government. So during the Works Progress administration, if the government paid for it, if the government paid an artist to do it, then it is in the public domain. So that's another reference point for you as artists to look into things like that. Flickr, you can go through and find works that are public domain, but I always double check it with Wikimedia Commons, and I always contact the artist just in case, because it's the internet and you're not dealing with anything that is fact checked. But there are a lot of options that you can go through, along with other museums. Like the Met, I think, released 700,000 works into the public domain 4 or 5 years ago, and they have that on their website. So did the National Portrait Gallery. And all of these museums have information about it going into Creative Commons and the use and rights that are permitted for people to use it.
Wonderful.
Sarah. So just to clarify, so any artwork that was created through the Works Progress Administration or the other New Deal art projects,
If it was paid for by the government.
If it was paid for by the government through one of their programs,
Correct.
that would be public domain, and
Mhm.
that artwork could be reproduced as a print, for instance.
Correct.
Okay, that's good information to know.
Yeah, we've been working on a headshots progress. We've actually been reaching out to you. My interns have been sending you emails, Mark Harris.
Now, one question also that of mine is, we actually have a study that is a watercolor for one of Kelly Fitzpatrick's post office murals.
Go on.
That was donated to us. It's a sort of a quirky image, and was not what ended up actually being used for the final product.
Mm-hmm.
However, you know, I when I saw it and it was offered to us, I thought, you know, is this really, you know, is the study owned by the federal government?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a question that I still am certain of.
Unfortunately, I am not a lawyer.
Unfortunately, right?
I know.
But
Much to
I've-
my
you know,
parents' chagrin.
I've
Hey,
worked
as
with
a new
loads.
parent, the bucks would be helpful.
I've worked with so many
Awesome.
lawyers. I had a lawyer on a Zoom call for an archive group that I'm on a few weeks ago, and every single thing that everybody asked him, the answer he said was probably.
Yeah.
That's useful.
It's complicated. It's so complicated.
We have also had, Sarah, we have also had a family member of Kelly Fitzpatrick's come forward with drawings of stakes for some of the murals, the post office murals.
Well,
And we
you
do
know
have
who you need to talk to about that. It's not me, it's Margaret Lynch.
we do have images of those, and they're in the process of being restored. The originals are.
Excellent.
Some interesting pieces.
That's very exciting. And piggybacking on the work that we've been doing with Mark and with Julie, is we're working on finding public domain headshots for all of the artists in our collection. So
wow.
Oh, neat.
that's we have a lot of artists in our collection. But part of that is using those public domain and Creative Commons and released options to shed more light on the artists behind the works, just like Julie was talking about with Yusuf Karsh, is putting a face to the photographer. So it's not just Winston Churchill that's looking at you, it's also the artists themselves.
You know, I think that's very clever. I've traveled across the country looking at art, and sometimes when there's an individual show, they'll, you know, of a featured artist, they'll show an image, but I've never seen that next to each image. And I think that makes it much more personalized. And
Yeah, I think it's a
interesting.
great
Bravo
idea.
for coming up with a creative idea.
Uh-huh.
We have been doing some of that, and we do have a lot of images, fortunately, of a lot of our artists because of the scrapbooks that were donated to us from the colony. But we've shared some of those with the museum, and we actually have more, Sarah, than y'all have requested or inquired about.
I've only made it to letter H. I'm slowly.
Okay, that makes sense.
It's not the main part of my job right now, so it's when I have an hour or two, then I make a little progress and do some research. So it's slow and
And we
steady.
would be happy to share
Thank
more,
you.
for sure.
Thank you.
But
I'm
we
very
do-
excited to hear that. I know the curators will be as well.
We do on our labels, our art labels, on the ones we display in our gallery, we do include a headshot when it's about when we have it. And in most cases, so far, we have.
Excellent. I'm
I
glad
do
to hear
think
that.
it's great to be able to see the person, the artist, along with their work. I think it's really helpful.
Before we wrap up for this evening, I just want to let everybody know that the next event that the Montgomery Art Guild is going to organize is a members show at the Anita Fulmer Gallery as part of the, what is it called these days? It's the Cultural Affairs Office and the building that was formerly known as the Armory. It's the Art Council, sorry, the Montgomery Arts Council. We're going to have a show in that gallery. Anybody who's a member of the Montgomery Art Guild can submit one piece. There's no fee. There will be some awards. There'll be no judging. It will be done by a People's Choice Award. And we just thought this would be a nice winter exhibit to organize. And then in February, as part of Black History Month, we'll help organize a Black History show that all of artists will be invited to participate in. If you're a member of the Guild, you have probably seen information on these events. So keep an eye out for future updates on that. And then
The
one last
member
thing.
show that with the cultural affairs, is that the one in Wetumpka?
No, this is going to be here in Montgomery at the Armory Arts Learning Center down on Madison next to the Curb Market.
And when
Do you get emails from the Art Guild?
yeah, I did, but I didn't see that one. I saw
Yeah.
the one for Wetumpka.
No, it's in there. Go back and take another look at it. That email was a little bit discombobulated, but there's information in there on that.
I'll look again.
Okay. So I really want to thank Julie. I really want to thank Leanna. I want to thank Mark Harris for being part of this. This was a great discussion, very interesting, very enlightening. I know that oftentimes a lot of us don't even think about these questions. So it's really great to start in, have that sort of brought onto the playing field as we do this work. Thank you so much for being part of this. And also thanks to everybody who joined us this evening to attend. At the high point, we had 22 people participating, and that's great. So I want to thank you all. We will be posting in the next couple of days this video to the Montgomery Art Guild website. You'll find a link there. So if you wanted to watch it again, you could. And I think that will be it. Yeah.
Thanks,
Okay.
Lauren.
Thank you all. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much.
everybody.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thank
Sarah,
you.
So good to see you, Leanna. Everyone, nice to meet you. Mark, lovely, wonderful. Thank you.
Good night, all.
Thank you.
Gotta go watch the semi-final of Break Off, British Bake Off. Ah.
Good night.